Hello, everyone. Ana Pacheco, SantaFe101.com. My guest today is Pat Taylor, and he has spent his career restoring historic Adobe buildings. Pat, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, ma'am, you do.
Oh, good. Well, full disclosure for anybody watching this interview, I'm friends with the Taylor family. In 2012, I wrote the biography for Pat's father, J. Paul Taylor. And the family has a terrific legacy and story down in southern New Mexico in the community of Mesilla. And Pat, I often think that you probably have gone into this line of work because your father and mother purchased this historic old Adobe home in 1956, I believe, on the Mesilla Plaza, and they spent their entire lives restoring it little by little. So I'm thinking, as a little kid, you probably were inspired by that. Is that correct?
I was. My folks acquired the place in the early 1950s. It's needed a lot of work over the years, and it's had a major influence on my life.
Well, I did recount in the book that there was a time, because there was always work going on, and it was an old Adobe, that sometimes you little kids, all seven of you, the children, you'd wake up and sometimes there'd be like little bits of sand coming out of the ceiling from the Adobe. So I thought that was kind of fun. So tell me, you're currently working on a project in your own hometown. Tell me a little bit about that.
We have 3 local projects, fortunately, especially with the COVID right now. One of them is behind the church in Mesilla. It's what we refer to as a Guadalupe house. My wife, Wendy, and my nephew, Paul, put together a website, www.guadalupehouse.org. And it chronicles the history of the building and the preservation, the Adobe preservation work that we're doing.
And so on that website, are you like filming it and saying, this is what it looked like when we began, here we are at phase 1, phase 2, and then is it kind of a tutorial? Do you explain, well, now today I'm going to do this to help do that, or what's on the website?
It's it is a bit of a tutorial. It's not video, it's still pictures. The history of the families is just really, really interesting, and that, all that kind of is a spin-off from how we grew up, as far as how our parents immersed us in history and the culture and in New Mexico.
And so what is some of the history? Who was the family that owned it?
Blas Teran was the first family that was there. He came from Doñana. Before that, he came from Senecu de Sur. He was a judge. The Ramon Gonzalez family was next. They were there in the late 1870s, and he was a prominent Mesiero. And his family sold the property in the 1930s, and it's passed through several different hands until Wendy and I acquired it from Alejandro Hall's estate about 4 years ago.
And what type of shape was it in when you actually purchased the property?
It was in a bit of a rough shape, a lot of deferred maintenance, which is typical. It suffers from the typical problems that we have with adobes, from especially the salitre, the salts that come up with the moisture into the base of the walls, which require a lot of work. And
so when you say they come up in the adobe, so this is coming up from the earth and they somehow penetrate the adobe, is that what happens?
Well, adobes are a great sponge, and through capillary action, they wick up moisture very easily, especially the old buildings that have stone and lime foundations or no foundations at all. It's a little bit of a mystery how it all happens if you're not experienced in what you're looking at. But capillary action and the salt problems are prevalent throughout our agricultural valleys in New Mexico.
And you were mentioning lime, and so in the old days, I remember from my research and doing work here in New Mexico, they had the enjoradoras, the women plasterers, both the Hispanic and the Native American women. They would, like, once a year or every couple years, they would replaster the adobe homes. Is that a practice that still goes on now? Do you know?
In southern New Mexico, not really. I hear more of it in northern New Mexico.
And why is that?
I'm not sure. It's probably because there's more, obviously more indigenous pueblos in the north where that practice is still continued. in southern New Mexico, we don't really have pueblos. We have Mexican and Spanish land grants where, through the generations, people have worked to build and maintain their homes. What we've seen in the past century is a loss of the old maestros, the albañiles, who would do the work. And it's mostly because times have changed and materials have changed. We've gone from mud and lime to more of a stick and cement stucco type of building. And so the adobes are there's still quite a few, but they're not as many as there were.
So if somebody was watching this video now, they found a really cool old adobe home someplace, and in the past it had been plastered with lime and what would you say, stick or whatever the ingredient was. Would they be able to switch over to a current day type of plaster, or would they have to continue with that type of plaster?
Well, the problem with using cement and concrete products in a cement plaster or concrete colors is the moisture takes longer to dry out, and as a result, the salts crystallize within the structure of the wall, causing damage. With that crystallization of the salts, there's 8,000 pounds per square inch expansion when they dry. So it really tears the adobes apart. It's what's destroying our infrastructure of bridges and roadways. So you can imagine what it does to adobes.
So if somebody was watching this and they were considering buying this old, 200-year-old adobe home, you would recommend that they try to find people that know how to, the old ways, the way they did it in the old days, to restore it, because in a way you might be destroying the present day adobe. Is that correct?
Exactly. There's I kind of refer to the cement plastering and the concrete collars as expensive band-aids that don't work. You have to have, for these old adobes, you have to have an adobe that can transpire the moisture out to the outside surface of the adobe, and cement and contemporary materials really don't allow you to do that.
And it sounds like it's a lot of work for sure, but it sounds are there still people? I mean, I know you've devoted your life to this, this type of restoring of historic buildings. Are there people around that know how to do this today that, especially up here? I mean, I'm in Santa Fe, you're way down south near the Mexican border. Are there people around that you could like Google, or how would you find people that know what they're doing to help you with these projects?
Well, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because, there's a lot of Adobe contractors, and the majority of them work in the contemporary Adobe industry. And they, of course, they have to build things to code, and they have concrete stem walls and contemporary cement plastered walls. And then you have a very small niche of the contractors who do it the old way, using permeable materials, methods, and traditions. So there is a difference. Not as many of the people who work on old ones as there used to be.
But you're saying if you can find these people that know how to do it the old way, you should, because in a way you might be doing more damage than good. Is that correct?
Definitely.
Okay. And so I know a few years back, you used to, you helped to restore, or you did preservation work on the San Miguel Mission Church here in Santa Fe, which is purportedly the oldest church in the United States. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to work on that project.
It was a very neat project. San Miguel Chapel, as to what it's actually called, is probably, as you had mentioned earlier, one of the oldest churches in New Mexico, if not the oldest church. It's a great old building. Antonio Martinez with Cornerstones and I did the preservation plan. Jake Barrows, the executive director, and now church's director of Cornerstones, they had run a multi-year project in the preservation of that chapel. So really,
and Cornerstones, again, it's what type of an organization is Cornerstones?
They're a nonprofit. They work with communities to restore historic structures. They've been around for, late 1980s, maybe. Okay. 1985, 88.
And getting back to San Miguel, so it was built supposedly between 1605 and 1608. In all the work that you've done, in your life, working on something as old as that's over 400 years now, what is the difference between that type of an adobe structure to say even 150 years ago? Do you see a big difference?
Yeah, there are. You see different sizes of adobes through the different eras. In the colonial time period, the adobes were much bigger, and that continued throughout the Mexican time period with the um, Americanization, so to speak, of New Mexico. The adobes started getting smaller, and walls started not being as thick as they once were.
And why is that, do you think? It just people didn't have the time, or why was that so different? I mean, why is it different?
It's kind of a combination of factors. One of them being labor and material costs compared to back then. Labor costs back then was obviously not as expensive, and there were the economy was different, so there were a lot of people who built their own buildings, a lot of people who built our cultural and religious buildings, and of course people built their own homes, so they varied in design and thickness. So it's a little bit confusing understanding when something stops and when something starts, but we see a lot of the bigger adobes as far as the 1 foot by 2 foot by 4 inches thick in the older colonial type of buildings.
Okay. I'm thinking too that are you familiar with the San Esteban Church up at Acoma Pueblo? I think they have 8-foot adobe walls.
They do. I've worked on that too. That's a great building.
That's a beautiful one. So would you say that maybe the churches had bigger bigger adobes than the homes that or have you worked on like old homes that have 8-foot walls?
Well, not the old homes don't have 8-foot walls. What you usually see is 2 or 3 foot thick walls in the older homes. On the churches, you have much thicker walls because of the height to width ratio. The heights of these old churches, adobe churches, Acoma is a great example, are very tall and very long. So adobe buildings that are not supported laterally as far as intersecting walls, you need more of a wider wall to withstand that overturning moment.
I guess getting back to the San Miguel Mission Church is that during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, it was all the churches were burned in New Mexico with the exception of San Esteban. But at San Miguel, the roof burnt because I guess it was made of wood, but the walls remained intact. So that's probably so that's definitely an advantage of adobe. I've heard also that, adobe homes stay cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. Just kind of sell me more on adobe.
Well, there's 2 ways of looking at adobe as far as insulative. You have what they refer to as a time lag effect, where you have a thick wall and it takes so long for the elements to pass all the way through the wall, and that lends itself to the warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And then you have the contemporary type of adobes that are, we call it the thermos bottle effect, where they insulate the outside and they heat the inside. And that's where the thin walls come in, because saves on labor, and they're able to heat their homes with this thermos bottle type effect.
I've heard though that also, right, like today, we have Wi-Fi, electricity, plumbing, all the things, and of course that makes it way more expensive. But why is it that oftentimes the internet or the Wi-Fi it can't permeate the mud walls? What's that about?
I would think it's just the mass of the earth. I live in an adobe home that we remodeled and added onto, and you can't get good reception in some of the rooms.
So what would you recommend? Again, if somebody you're thinking if they found a great deal, or they want to live in an adobe home in New Mexico, but of course they work remotely. And I mean, everybody wants to have access to the internet these days. What would you recommend that they do if they're getting this older home but they want to be able to, live in the 21st century?
Well, depending upon how you get your Wi-Fi service, it comes into the house and you have a router. You want to place your router in kind of a central location, so that you can affect as many rooms as you can as far as distance. But you also have, let's see, you can also put, with contemporary electrical, you can put repeaters. You can plug in repeaters that actually send that signal throughout the rest of the house. That helps with the coverage issue. So you really have to plan where you're going to put it. It's not impossible to have Wi-Fi. It's actually very easy. It's just a matter of strategic placement.
But there definitely is a difference between, regular frame houses and Adobe houses in terms of being able to access
Yes.
Wi-Fi. Okay. And so so again, Adobes are, when I was in school, we had a class where we learned how to make Adobes, and it was a mixture of sand, dirt, water, and straw, and then it would dry out in the sun. Tell me a little bit about what is the actual ratio of sand versus clay or straw, or what is the mixture for an Adobe?
Adobe is roughly between 60 and 80% sand and between 20 and 40% clay, depending upon the clays and depending upon the sand. Straw is also used. A lot of people would argue as to the function of straw, and as a good friend of mine, an architect in Chihuahua, he's now in Cuernavaca, Antonio Guerrero, he would say a dicho in Spanish that kind of sums it up. Un adobe sin paja es un adobe sin alma.
Which means in English?
An adobe that doesn't have straw is an adobe that doesn't have a soul. So it's more of a tradition. In the Sierra Tarahumaras in Chihuahua, you'll have, they'll use pine needles because of its availability. So a lot of our building techniques are derived from material availability, whether it be the vigas or the decking, or the floors, or the dirt, what have you. Materials dictate pretty much everything.
I know that you make your own Adobes for for your projects, at least down in southern New Mexico. You use a special ingredient that I had never heard of. What else do you use for making Adobes down there?
We use tierco, horse manure, and it helps combat the salts, as we refer to them as salitre.
And when you say combat it, does it absorb them, or what is it? Or
Well,
helps dry them out, or what does it do?
The old timers would say that they would counteract or combat. There's a chemical thing that happens. I'm not quite sure about that, and I would have to ask some soil scientists, friends of mine, to see if there's any truth to that. But it's one of those tradition things that people would use. We don't use horse manure in all our Adobes, but if a friend of mine down the road, he has a horse, if there's some dry manure and it's easy for us to get, we'll use it in our Adobes.
Okay. And then what is the amount of time that an Adobe has to dry before it's before it's solid enough that you could go ahead and use that?
Well, it has to begin with, when you make an Adobe, you make the mud real thick. You lift up your forms. You want your mud to stand the full 4 inches or whatever thickness you're making. About the second or third day, you can stand them up on end to start drying more rapidly. At the end of the first week, you can actually stack them in a pile, but you can't use them for a full month because they have to fully dry. And if you use them prior to that, they're subject to cracking.
And I've heard up here in northern New Mexico that a lot of these old homes, the old Adobes, the rodents have gotten in, or they can be a real mess. Do you have any recommendations for, again, somebody, found this great deal on an old Adobe home, but they've got mice in the walls, or what would you recommend? Rather, you don't want to knock down the entire structure. How can you work with what you have?
Well, with that particular problem, as we talked a little bit earlier, capillary action has an effect that's directly related to what you're talking about. Through capillary action in the salts, the base of the Adobes, parts of them become powder because they're delaminating through that salt process of expansion of salts. So it's very easy for rodents to get in there. We did a workshop one time in a place called La Cienega. It's not the Santa Fe La Cienega that we know, but it's over there east of Tumacacri Mission.
Mhm.
And we were taking off plaster from the side of the wall. And as we took off the cement plaster from the side of the wall, there was a snake down up against the wall in between the plaster, taking advantage of these areas that the salt has crumbled the adobes, and it's easy for rodents and rats and snakes to get in. So in this particular case, you know, when you have a lot of salitre and you have a lot of capillary action, you see a softer part of the adobe that the rodents can get through. So it's a matter of effective trapping and making it not so inviting.
But you would still be able to work with what you have. You wouldn't recommend that the whole thing be raised and
Oh,
start from
no.
scratch. Work with the structure if you can. I mean, it is basically, would you say that most of these old adobes, you can work with it? It's not a total loss, even if they have had, you know, rodent destruction or that type of thing. There's a way to restore them that you could build from that rather than starting from scratch.
You bet, and that's really important point you make, because you know, we're really talking about the original green. Reusing an adobe building is about as green as you can get. So in that regards, you want to be able to utilize in the adobe. I mean, of course, there's some that are damaged beyond repair. But there's usually some central themes of damage that are happening, whether it's poor grading or a bad roof design where the canales are leaking. So it's just a matter of kind of keeping up with the maintenance. We do a lot of basal stabilization, where we had mentioned at the base of the wall we have this type of damage. And when you're doing the stabilization using traditional materials of mud and adobe at the base of the wall, you have the opportunity to be able to repair those areas that the rodents have been able to get into. Oftentimes when you leave an old building cement plastered, you don't know what's on the inside of that. You don't know what the condition of the adobes is. And if the damage isn't too great, you can leave it alone. But a lot of times this damage is hidden, or you can see the telltale signs of that damage that needs repair.
And then what about the use of lime? What do you still use that? Or I mean, it was used in the old days. What does is lime good or bad, or how does it complement the adobe structure?
Very much so. Cement and adobes have the coefficients of expansion and contraction are night and day, and they really work against each other. So as a building heats up during the day, you know, you have this friction between that expansion. With adobe and lime, the coefficients of expansion and contraction are very similar. So you have a building that tends to move together. The other property that lime has is it helps wick the moisture out of the walls, especially the salts. So that damage appears on the surface of the plaster, of the lime plaster, that can be easily repaired instead of within the structural mass of the wall, which makes it more challenging to do those repairs.
So in all the restoration work that you've done, is lime, do you still advocate and use lime in most of your projects, or?
We do, but we also make note that we want to follow what was done historically. And if a building was mud plastered, we would want to continue that mud plaster. If a building was lime plastered, you know, we'd want to continue that lime plaster. If it was lime plastered in the past, and then the lime plaster was taken off and cement plaster was put on, you know, we can usually see the damage from that, and we oftentimes go back to using a lime plaster because it's the right material.
Well, it sounds, the way you're describing it, it's as if an adobe home it's a living structure. It is living.
Yeah, it definitely is.
That's cool. Well, you know, we're at the end of the interview. I just wanted to, you know, Pat Taylor, did you want to say any like words of advice for somebody who might be thinking about restoring an old adobe home? Is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, I guess the only thing that I wanted to mention is whether you're in a home that's been in your family for generations, or you've just bought a home and you're trying to look at what you want to do. An assessment is really important. An assessment, there can be different levels of an assessment. There can be some minimal types of things and some maximum invasive types of things. But you want to do a good assessment, because that assessment is going to tell you what the building needs. And then as you open up areas and you start doing the work, you know, you have to follow the damage. You have to have good drainage around a building. You have to have a roof that works. There's a lot of simple common sense things. But before you jump in it, you just need to have a good idea of what you're doing, and you need to find someone who can do that work. And there's still a lot of Adobe contractors out there. There's still a few who do the old traditional stuff. So, you know, my recommendation is to go with someone who has that experience, especially generational experience.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for your time, and best of luck to you on the Guadalupe project. I'm going to go again. Your website is www.guadalupeproject.org.
Yeah, www.guadalupehouse.org.
Excellent. Listen, thanks again, Pat. And my love to your family. Take care.
Bye-bye.